I am going to read a story that that was in the Phoenix last August, so it's called High Noon, David Kornfeld's High Noon, and here it is. Ian was warning me about David again. As he led me up the back stairs, past a trash can with a length of 35mm film spilling out of it, he reiterated, David didn't want to do this. David can be difficult. Don't take David the wrong way. When we arrived in the cramped, neatly organized projection booth, David took up the mantra himself. Looking up from a styrofoam bowl of takeout Chinese food, his first words to me were a self-deprecating heads up. Ian told you I'm prickly. Then he told me he'd drop a projector on my head if I misquoted him in my article. Within a couple weeks, he'd invited me into his cramped, neatly organized Somerville home to listen to Sgt. Pepper's on a pair of scavenged movie theater speakers the size of refrigerators. He'd been raving about them. He spent years tracking them down. They were the best speakers. They were in his kitchen. They were 6 feet from each other, and I sat between them on a swivel chair. I listened to Lovely Rita, and it felt like I could hear the traffic on Abbey Road, molecules of air hitting the studio walls, the sound of George Harrison thinking. And that was even with David standing over me shouting things like, is your mind blown or what? Every minute or so. David Kornfeld, who runs the projection booths at the Somerville Theater, is perhaps best thought of as the enfant terrible of the local projection scene. His method of terror is a commitment to top quality presentation that exceeds what many of his peers consider necessary. He is uncompromising. One elite local projectionist calls him a mega nerd, which I interpreted to refer both to his insanely encyclopedic knowledge of the craft, as well as, to a lesser degree, his forthright, suffer no fools demeanor. A prominent local cinema manager dismisses him with a note of bitterness as an extremophile, whose sole concern is getting it 1,000% right. Another veteran theater manager says he's a throwback, a passionate projectionist whose zeal needs to be tempered. There is edge-free praise as well. Local horror festival impresario Jonica Stuckey calls him the most meticulous and painstaking projectionist I've worked with. Marianne Lemke, former co-owner of the Brattle Theater, where David worked in the 80s, calls him obsessive in a good way. He's a real character, she says, and someone who will go down in Boston projectionist history as an eccentric and very devoted projectionist. We loved David. The projectionist at the Somerville has indeed been consistently excellent for years now, bright, clear, full of all the joys of celluloid, but it wasn't always so. 10 years ago, the locally owned 5-screen venue specialized in second-run movies at cut-rate prices. Projection was an afterthought. You can't imagine how bad it was, says Kornfeld. Ian Judge, then newly hired as the Somerville's general manager, was determined to turn that around. He fixed the popcorn machine, applied a fresh coat of paint, and exchanged the slapdash projectionist staff for an all-star cast of veteran union men. I was almost drooling to think about working with people who actually knew what they were doing in the booth, he says. He saw his theater competing in quality with the Brattle and the Coolidge Corner Theater. David Kornfeld, he knew, was a man who could help him get there. And as cinema marks its transition from celluloid to digital, Kornfeld is the exemplar of an aesthetic that may soon be going the way of the Nickelodeon, the last of a special breed of movie lover. Born in 1959 in Manhattan to a schoolteacher mother and an audio engineer father, as a child, David Kornfeld treasured visits to his father's recording studio in awe of the pro gear. Tube amps, 2-inch reel-to-reels, the works. This translated early on to an interest in projecting films. He still has a copy of the Bell and Howell projectionist card that he earned in 4th grade for operating the class projector. After moving to Boston to attend college in 1978, he saw a pair of Norelco projectors in the booth at the Astor, where a friend was working. It was a bolt from the blue moment. I took one look at those machines and I was like, I want to work with those. He soon got into the profession for real. The Projectionist Union assigned him to its standard proving ground, the combat zone. The thinking was, if you screwed up there, the weirdos in the audience wouldn't give a damn, says David. Kornfeld's first job was at the Pilgrim, an enormous, ornate hall that had become a popular trysting place for gay men. It was straight porn, but it was a dark environment, he said, with lots and lots and lots of private spaces. The loges, all these various staircases that went all over the place. The 17-year-old Kornfeld screened Inside Jennifer Wells, in which Miss Wells goes down on a guy in a projection booth. This gave the audience ideas. David says, the knocks on my door didn't stop for 2 weeks. He politely deflected them. Kornfeld worked the Pussycat, the West End Pussycat, the State 2, the Art. But he wasn't in the zone for too long. Quote, you were judged on how fast you got out. Some people never got out of there. They just worked there for years and years and years. He was moved up and out in 6 months. Kornfeld went through some dark years in subparts and middling booths. At one time or another, he worked at the Astor, the Exeter, the Charles, the Cherry, the Savoy, the Saxon, the Gary, the Orson Welles, the Pie Alley, the Pagoda, the Janus, the Sac Cinema 57, the Wang Theater, the Alston Twin, the Showcase Revere, the Cleveland Circle. Only one shift. What an armpit, he described it. Plus the college screening rooms, Harvard, Emerson, Brandeis, MIT, Northeastern. There were frequent frustrations. He would request needed upgrades and be rebuffed. Lamp house bulbs in particular, which are expensive and need regular replacement, would get pushed hundreds of hours beyond their limit, resulting in way too dim images on the screen. By the mid-1980s, Kornfeld made it to the top of the heap, a senior projectionist simultaneously at the Brattle and the Coolidge, shuttling back and forth across the river, setting up and projecting dozens of films each week. It was probably during this era when I first experienced his work. By the time I graduated Cambridge Regional Latin School in Harvard Square in 1986, I had seen every noir worth seeing at the Brattle. I even have a projection memory from one of them, maybe The Big Sleep, staring up at the boiling, beautiful black and white grain of Bogart's face and being transported not by story, not by character or idea, but by the most elemental aspect of film. Shades of light, immaculately, blindingly, beautifully projected before me. With such directness, it was as if I was seeing the same photons that had been on set that day in 1940s Hollywood, bottled up and released by the magic of emulsion, celluloid, and projection. As much as any other, it's probably the moment I became aware of good projection as a thing unto itself, as ancillary and as essential to a film as an amp was to an electric guitar. And it was all coming out of David Kornfeld's booth. Kornfeld bounced out of the projection profession in frustration in 2002. He was working at the Harvard Square Theater that year. The union staged a strike over a proposal to let managers work the booth on some shifts. After a long, bitter negotiation that Kornfeld still drops F-bombs recounting, managers finally, quote, forced this deal down the union's throat, as Kornfeld recounts. He quit on principle, he says, calling it a retirement. But he was soon to join the Somerville staff. The place was in rough shape. I went down to the 2 house, he said, and we were running Phantom of the Opera, and it's out of focus. So I turn the focus knob and it goes more out of focus, and I turn the focus knob the other way and it goes even more out of focus. And I go, oh, no wonder he wants me. Plus you couldn't see the image anyway because it was bloody dim, it just sucked. The changes were gradual but profound. Judge upgraded every aspect of the theater with good presentation given center stage. We're in the movie business, Judge told me. Some theaters are in the food business. They would show you slides if you still bought food. And if you're going to be in the movie business, well, goddamn it, your movie better look good. There was one last thing to upgrade, the movies he was showing. Judge wanted first run. Newer movies meant more customers, with 55 to 90% of ticket prices going directly to the studios. That didn't translate directly into the bottom line, but it did mean more concession sales. The added beer and wine sales alone, he said, practically paid for the equipment upgrades. A parade of studio representatives came through the door, Judge recounts. First Warner Brothers, who liked what they saw and took a chance on giving The Departed to the Somerville in October of 2006 as a first-run engagement. It did great business. Then Fox offered them Borat on release day. Universal followed suit that December with The Good Shepherd. All were successes, said Judge, and soon led to the Somerville becoming the first-run house it is today. The projection booth in the Somerville's cavernous 890-seat House 1 is Kornfeld's masterwork. Built at a cost of $150,000 or more, it features massive twin Norelco projectors and touches like a recirculating water cooler system and $800 windows that can be easily removed for cleaning. Its interior is painted to his specification, pale blue. In terms of the picture on the screen and the sound you're listening to, I would put that up against any theater you can name, any one, and I will either equal or better them, he told me. John Quackenbush, who runs projection for both the Harvard Film Archive and the Independent Film Festival of Boston, goes to screenings in House 1 regularly. It's very close to perfection there, he told me. It's one of the best places to watch in the country. He puts it in the same league as personal favorites of his like the Coolidge and the State Theater in Traverse City, Michigan. Kornfeld says the Norelco AA's in the booth are the best projectors ever made. Quackenbush takes issue. He's partial to the Harvard Film Archive's Kinetones. Designed and built in the early 60s for the esoteric and short-lived Todd A.O. film format, it can run both 70 and 35 millimeter prints at either 24 or 30 frames a second. They are menacing steel beasts, painted industrial beige and bristling with add-on tech. Perched at the very top of the steep balcony, they point almost straight down at the screen, which, seen through the port glass, is the size of a postcard. Excerpting. This was a long piece. New scene. I suggest you stick around after the movie. Kornfeld had buttonholed me in the lobby on my way to a recent House 1 repertory screening of The Spy Who Loved Me. Making conversation, I told him Roger Moore was my favorite Bond actor. He flipped me the bird. His fist flattened discreetly against his chest, middle finger slowly cranking up. His way of saying he was more of a Sean Connery fan. Honestly, he's probably right. The Spy Who Loved Me sucked. But my friend and I stuck around after the showing, as asked, sitting on the edge of the stage in the empty theater. Eventually, Kornfeld came down from the booth and disappeared into the wings. We heard noises, then saw movement. He was bringing the black framing curtains in, changing the shape of the screen. It was like he was rolling time back. We'd gone from the conventional modern widescreen format to the old-style 4:3 format. Emerging from the curtains, he told us he was about to show us the greatest Technicolor we'd ever seen. He's asked me not to reveal what picture we saw, but I can say that it was a cartoon, a 20-minute fragment of a 50-year-old Technicolor print, and it blew my mind. Blazes of color, blinding whites, gorgeous organic grain, life boiling and jumping off the screen. Technicolor is a major high point in the history of cinema technology for Kornfeld, one he mentions constantly. One evening, in a dressing room below the stage, I asked why it was so special for him. It was a printing process, an actual printing process, he told me. It was actually like printing a magazine. If you wanted a pure level, a pure yellow, you weren't, where Kodak is, where it has to work in conjunction with all the other layers of the emulsion. And maybe you can't get the organic dyes or the color couplers to give you that yellow. You could manufacture a brighter yellow or a duller yellow or any other yellow you want. And then you could print it onto a blank strip of film and out it would go. And it looks incredible and it doesn't fade. Get to know Kornfeld and express an interest in presentation, as I have, and you may be invited to a private screening. He holds them regularly in House 1 in the morning when the theater is closed. His taste in movies is wide-ranging, so the selection is guided by the availability of high-quality prints. A recent screening, for example, featured a gorgeous print of a 90s Hollywood blockbuster. Again, he asked me not to reveal which. When I'd seen it originally, I considered it ho-hum, but in Kornfeld's hands, it gained life, color, intensity. Skin tones in particular revealed subtlety, consistency, emotion. Colors were rock solid. It was a parade on a sunny day. Kornfeld explained to me that this print looked so good in part because it predated the introduction of the dreaded DI, or digital intermediate. Kornfeld's color wheel of film in Kornfeld's color wheel of film technologies, DI occupies the polar opposite position to Technicolor. In a DI film, every frame of the original is scanned, digitized, manipulated, and transferred back to negative for mass printing. It screws up the color. It screws up shadow detail, contrast values, everything, he says. It's junk. It looks terrible. It can't handle low-light scenes. So if you ever see a low-light scene, you'll see a lot of noise and digital error correction crap, because it just does not know what to do with it. It looks like doggy-doo compared to what film can look like. DI is the first wave of what David calls the digital holocaust. Most Boston theaters either have converted to all digital projection or soon will. Major studios have signaled they will stop distributing 35mm prints. The Somerville has installed, this is a bit that refers to part of that I skipped. The Somerville's Christie's, which are the digital projectors that they ended up installing, are high-end machines that cost $60,000 a piece and bear little resemblance to the digital projectors on the conference table at your work, but they are digital and feature all the flaws of DI and then some. I'll just step back here and let Kornfeld roll. This is all in quotes. Digital sucks. It is a giant, complete, total crock. It is a scam. It is a lie. It is a de-evolution. It is a step backwards. It is garbage. You are not getting the kind of experience that you would be able to get with film. You are being cheated. You have an inferior image, inferior sound, inferior color rendition, inferior motion tracking, inferior shadow detail, inferior light, inferior in every conceivable possible thing. When you talk about quality and digital in the same sentence, it's almost laughable to me. You can't uphold a high standard of presentation with digital. That's the problem with it. It just naturally sucks. And you know, it's one of those things where if you read these jerkweeds, it's like, oh, we have this resolution now and that resolution, and we can do this, and we can do this, and we can do this to this, and we can add the grain to it and scratches and make it look more like film, just so no one in the world will shoot or project in film. If you can explain that crap to me, I would love to understand it. You've already got this superior technology right in your hands. It's the death of an entire craft and the death of an entire way of seeing movies. And the problem is, if it goes too far, if this ridiculousness goes too far, it's something you're never going to be able to bring back, all right? At least not easily. And so, you know, if you think watching, oh, I don't know, Lawrence of Arabia on your television screen at home is the same as watching a 70mm presentation of it, you're out of your mind, okay? It isn't. And the problem is that they can push it to the point where you'll never see it right again. When House One's digital install is done, Kornfeld plans to hold a special screening one morning where he does an A/B comparison between analog and digital versions of one or more films. The presentation will be painstaking and, he predicts, devastating. He says it will run 3 hours and prove once and for all the inferiority of current digital formats to a picked audience of specialists, industry insiders, and critics. But Kornfeld's professional fate in the end is to do the best he can with the tools.
Oh.
Oh, did I turn it off?
You didn't. It looks like it's. Hold on.
I'm almost done.
Yeah. Battery.
Oh, I can read that. I can. All right. Yeah. Okay. Digital technology in action. Okay, almost done. So we're talking about David's special screening. It says it will run 3 hours and prove once and for all the inferiority of current digital formats to a picked audience of specialists, industry insiders, and critics. But Kornfeld's professional fate in the end is to do the best he can with the tools he hates. The good news is that he plans to make a go of it with the Christies. He's determined in a gloomy kind of way to make them look as good as they can. Not all projectionists are so dour. Veteran Brooklyn Academy of Music booth ace Mike Katz offers a gloom-free perspective on the stresses imposed on the profession by the digital shift. The passionate ones hang on, they acclimate, he told me in a phone conversation from his booth at BAM, where he heads both film and digital projection. Regardless of the technology, we're still watching movies. We're still allowed to escape. Katz recently screened one of his favorites, the 1952 Western High Noon, on digital, and says it looked better than any of the several 35mm prints of the film he's shown over the decades. Full disclosure, I'm a real film nut, like Kornfeld, and sometimes it's hard for me not to be heartbroken by these changes. But either I don't have his eye, I definitely don't have his eye. Or maybe I'm just an optimist. But I've seen a few digitally projected movies, and I thought some of them looked pretty good. Bogart at the Brattle in the 80s good? Mind-blowing good? No, not yet, not to me. But good enough to get lost in? Good enough to get carried away by? Maybe. Well, I'm kind of liking just projecting.
That's totally
okay. Last paragraph. One of these days, maybe even David Kornfeld will learn to stop worrying and love the bomb. Or not. Either way, I'll still be taking my family to our neighborhood cinema, the Somerville Theater, for film and digital. Glad to have him at the helm.